welcome back to the Pharma Daily. And today we are speaking from Kolkata, and here we are interviewing Mr. Anant Agrawal, the founder and CEO of Indoriv Clinical Private Limited, a CRO that works in around 3 different industries. Anant is a self-made entrepreneur born and brought up in Kolkata, who is a biomedical engineer and a scientist from University of Sheffield, England. I think he graduated, and he started his own company and rose it to become India's leading CRO. So, Anand, could you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi Mitali. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast and for so graciously flying down to Calcutta to shoot this with me. I'm very grateful. I started my journey in 2012. Once I graduated from Sheffield, unfortunately, I did not get a job. Even though I, passed out with honors and had like all the academic excellence that you could imagine, but when I came back, I literally had a broken knee and no job. I literally started with salary of 3,000 rupees per month, and I just landed a project for myself and just kept snowballing from there.
Okay, so you have been a student abroad, and our audience who want to, pursue studies in abroad, I want to ask this question for you. Can you tell us something about your college years?
I think education abroad, I would talk about UK. Education in the UK is actually very similar to the education in India because, if you think about it, education in India was, I know this is a controversial way of saying it, but sort of given by the British. Like the
Right.
education system in India that we study in our college was given by the British. So the education system is very similar in the UK and in India. But I think the difference is in terms of the research that UK has, in terms of the funding that they have. So because they have these magnanimous labs and they have these pharma companies and life sciences companies and technology companies and other companies which funds those universities, so students get more exposure to real time research projects, real time products and services, and get a more realistic experience than probably students here in India do.
Okay. So my next question obviously was going to be, what is the difference between Indian education and education abroad in terms of like life sciences fields? So like you're saying, the education is very similar. What exactly is the difference between the method of teaching or method of studying over there? Is it different or same like India?
No, again, like just to add on to what I said earlier, I feel like again exposure to something real. Like for example, if I'm teaching you a plus b whole square is a square plus b square plus 2ab, that's the same at both places. But the difference is that they would probably have those fancy labs and spiral learning for you to understand something much more in depth than you would have here back in India. Although I do feel weirdly so, even though we don't have that kind of exposure, I think Indian students, especially when they're doing masters there, have the best success rate even than the students that are local from there.
Okay. So tell us how you decided that you want to pursue your graduation outside, and how did you start preparing for it?
Honestly, I was in this twinning program where I did 2 years in Manipal and then I graduated from Sheffield. I transferred to Sheffield there. So it was like because I didn't have a lot of money back then, so it was like it was a midway that I could choose. So there is this ICAS program that Manipal University has, where you can do your credits in Manipal, and then you can transfer to a college there in the UK. So that's how it happened for me.
Okay. Any suggestions or advices for students who are planning to study abroad, especially belonging to biology or maybe life sciences background?
I think it's extremely important to know what you want to do because this is something I advise in general life also. If you cannot define what you want and why you want it, then you will end up picking the wrong university. So if you know exactly what you want to do and the kind of infrastructure or the kind of job or the kind of life you want to have, then you will be able to pick up the right university because I think the difference in different universities is like every university has a different department which they're good at. Like Sheffield was amazing in biotech and dentistry. So, people who want to study oral health would be great in going to Sheffield, but Leeds would be somewhere for biomechanics. So, I think something which is very important that most students should look at in the university is who's funding that university. because they will be their future employers.
Okay. So now I want to talk about your first job and your first salary. Like you just mentioned, it was 3,000 and something like that. So what's that story?
So basically, honestly, like I literally had no job when I came back to India because biomedical sciences and these things didn't exist, especially in Calcutta. So I got an internship where I was paid 100 rupees a day, basically for my transport and food costs, and I was giving 3,000 rupees per month. And I didn't end up working there for too long. That was for a month because I just got a freelance project where I started my business, Indoriv Clinical. And I mean, for the listeners, my first year revenue was 8,000 rupees. So that's where I started.
Okay. Why am I asking this question to you is because if you see around even today in 2024, the salaries for freshers who are graduating in life sciences or pharma backgrounds is not very high. So, what would you want to suggest to our audience? What should be their mindset if they're being paid very low compared to any other fields like IT when they're comparing their first salaries?
Today we are a company which employs more than 80, 100 people regularly across the spectrum where we, employ people in our work. And this is something that I tell everyone who joins my company. And that is always outwork your salary. Work to the limit where you feel you deserve. Because ultimately someone will notice and give it to you. It does not matter what your starting base is. It does not matter whether it's 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. If you feel that you deserve 1 lakh, work like you're a 1 lakh employee. Believe me, if that person doesn't see your value, someone else will and someone else will give it to you. You will land up somewhere where you will get the 1 lakh you deserve. But when you're a fresher, it's a clean slate. No one knows what you're doing. You can only go on industry standards, frankly. And for people who come with entitlement, that will be a very wrong way to start. If you deserve 1 lakh and people feel that you need 1 lakh or 2 lakhs or 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs or whatever it is, you will get to that level if you have intentionality. So I always tell these freshers who, complain about salaries and stuff like that, you work for 6 months and 1 year and you outwork your salary, you will ultimately get it. If not from me, then from someone else.
Okay, that's very insightful. And I think the people should really double check what he's telling today because nowadays, when I meet freshers from pharma or from life sciences background, it is very difficult to deal with them when we are telling them this is going to be your first CTC or in hand. Anyways, moving forward. So, what is freelancing according to you? Because it's a very famous term in the IT field. All the freshers and students over there know it. But for life sciences background students, somebody belonging to pharma, biotech, MSc, BSc backgrounds, the normal degrees that are taken place in India. So, what is freelancing according to you? And at the same time, how was it back then when you started it?
I think freelancing can apply to any role in a pharmaceutical environment or a pharmaceutical ecosystem. I mean, something that we need to understand at its base is that any healthcare delivery system, whether it is biotech, whether it's a pharmaceutical, whether it's a hospital, or whether it's a government service, comes down to patient lives, right? Now, it depends on what part of patient life are you impacting. So if you're talking about freelancing, it could be being a medical writer for a pharmaceutical company. It could be a blood collector who's working at a very low level on the ground to collect blood from patients. It could be a freelancer pharmacist who's writing, say, medical papers for different site management organizations or CROs. Or it could be even something really big as a auditor or a monitor, because there are several times when CROs don't have enough auditors and monitors to support their own projects, and they hire freelancers. So as a freelancer can be anything, but especially when it comes to life sciences, I do not believe that you can start as a freelancer, because you have to be a part of an institution, you have to be a part of an academic university, or you have to be a part of something larger to understand where you can add value, and then maybe detach yourself and add value to different places where you've gained the trust or where you've understood how this works. Because life sciences is one thing where it does not work like a design field or an architect or a lawyer or a CA. You have to be a part of something, uh, part of an institution for you to start becoming a freelancer. So you have to start somewhere.
Okay. That's again very fruitful to listen. And coming from a company owner, it gives the student, because our Indian society is having this mindset of having a permanent job initially, especially. Later on, I think after 2 3 years of experience, people get to know this, that okay, there is a freelancing profession that you can pursue, not need to have a job and kind of thing. So this is really fruitful to listen. Now, I would want to ask you, what was the next step? Like you said, you moved towards formulating your own company. So, how were the initial years and how did it get designed all over?
Honestly, like if you ask me very honestly, like why I started entrepreneurship is like purely out of desperation. I needed to put the food on the table. I was the only breadwinner of my family, so I just had to find some way in which I could support my family, and that's where it came from. Because frankly, I think most life sciences students do not come with the mindset of entrepreneurship. Most life science students, there would be very few who end up doing, because life sciences is a field where you have to be academic in nature to actually succeed in the life sciences, because you do lab work, you do wet work, you're not thinking finance. When you're studying biology, when you're studying molecular biology, or when you're studying biochemistry, you don't thinking, oh, this is how much money I will earn. You're thinking about, oh, how can I solve this problem? How can I isolate CD34 cells from stem cells? So it's like the whole mindset of a life sciences student or a pharmaceutical student or a pharmacist is very academic in nature. So to become an entrepreneur is, I mean, I would find that very rare in people from life sciences who would want to say that, oh, let me be an entrepreneur. I think that comes in much later. So it was the same for me when I came out of college. For me, it was just about, oh, like, okay, these are the way things work. I was sort of forced into entrepreneurship because I didn't get a job, frankly, and I had no money. So I just got a freelance project. So I was a freelance entrepreneur. And it just, I started doing well in one project and it started snowballing. So that's my trajectory. And in the first 3 4 years, I just completely failed. Like, I think um, by the third year, I wanted to quit and go for an MBA somewhere in America, apply for a scholarship, do something. But like, people around me just said that, just stick to it. Something will give. I think it was not before my sixth or seventh year before I started doing okay.
Okay. So generally in podcasts, people tell the fairy tale story about how their startup kicked off and everything. Since you've mentioned you wanted to quit in the third year, I want to ask you if you're comfortable in sharing what were the scenarios, and then how did you motivate or inspire yourself, or something externally happened that pushed you ki nahi, I want to do this, I want to carry this on, and how did you still pursue to?
I want to be very candid with you, Mitali.
Yeah.
Desperation.
Okay.
Because I didn't have the money to go study abroad, or I didn't have the money to study in India even. And I literally didn't know. I mean, whatever money I was earning was just good enough for, the basic necessities of life. I frankly didn't have an option but to go on, because there were so many people who were dependent on me. So I think, and I think that's something that a lot of people face. And after the first 3 4 years, I wanted to quit, but I did not have the luxury to quit. I do feel that it's a privilege for people who can quit something because they have a safety net, maybe, or maybe their parents can take care of them, or their families can take care of them. So I don't think I had that. And I think that was the only thing that made me continue. Uh, I don't know if I was motivated or not. I was just desperate. And it was just, let's do something. And like something will click. Like, let's be enthusiastic. Something will click. And I mean, now I'm at a privilege to say that if you try hard enough, something will click. It's a finite versus infinite game.
Right. Okay. So, next thing I want to ask, Indoriv Clinical, is the name coming from somewhere?
Yeah, it's funny actually. So, my parents, my father had this company, Indoriv Refractories. And so, Indoriv is basically, Indu is my bua, and Ravi is my father. So, my grandfather had called it Indoriv. And my family used to be in business. They had a very big business, but unfortunately, that did not work. But that company name still remained. So, it was sort of trying to create, carry forward that legacy of Indoriv.
Great. Yeah, I was wondering where does the name come
Yeah.
from. Okay. So I want to ask you, how do you manage to run so many multiple offices across throughout India, across the globe? And also, I want to ask you, when I look at the website, I see so many locations. The way you're portraying in India, what
Mm.
all locations you're marking the offices. If we map out, you're having offices at very rare locations or rarer cities. So what is the mindset behind that?
I think that's the future of India. I think the future of healthcare delivery is in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Because, I mean, if you look at it even from a regulatory standpoint, I think in India, 60 to 70% of all healthcare are in the major cities. And 90% of India is empty. When I say empty, I mean that they don't have established healthcare networks. And that's where you find patients. And because of the nature of my business, where you need a more diseased population, I think those cities suit me. Tier 2, tier 3 cities suit me. And I think I really encourage a lot more people to come up as entrepreneurs in this field and set things up there. I mean, I would encourage them personally also.
Okay. What would you advise to somebody who's planning to become a life sciences entrepreneur?
I think just go for it. Uh,
Okay.
because frankly, I feel that India hasn't even scratched the surface when it comes to life sciences entrepreneurship for several reasons. I mean, I don't think the government has enough infrastructural capabilities or the funding, because even when we talk about Viksit Bharat, I feel that the government is more into investing in infrastructure and not healthcare infrastructure. So I feel healthcare is something that the young people, the young entrepreneurs have to develop on their own. And I really feel that there are there's a requirement of 10,000 good life sciences company in India if we really want to take India forward.
Can you name some of the places where the work has been not even started? Name some of the places where we can work in healthcare system or
You mean
something.
the sectors of
The
healthcare?
sectors of healthcare
I
where
feel
somebody.
drug discovery
Okay.
is a great place to start, because India is mostly a generic nation where we produce mostly generic drugs, and most of the innovations come from abroad. And because the innovations come from abroad, the protocols are written according to them. When you do clinical trials in India, you don't do protocols made for Indian people, you do protocols made for people abroad. So the dosages that we take, Crocin 500 or something 1000 or paracetamol 650 mg, all these dosages are not really made in terms of, I mean, the studies are not made in terms of the Indian population. They are made according to a US population or a European population. So I feel for India, drug discovery is a great segment where people could get funding even from BIRAC and the Ministry of Biotechnology. And apart from drug discovery, I think genomic diagnostics, because I feel there are so many things now in terms of diseases where your medicines can change based on your certain genetic markers. And I mean, you won't even believe that 90% of the healthcare infrastructure doesn't have those kinds of genomic capabilities. So I think development of genomic capabilities is another sector where I think we can do really well. And the third segment where I'm doing is biobanking. I feel that biobanking has a huge scope. India has 20% of the world's disease population, which means if there are 100 people sick in the world, 20 people are in India. Where else do you start a healthcare startup?
Right. We are going to come back to biobanking in the coming questions. Since you use the word generics, I want to give you an impromptu question about what do you think about branded medicines versus generic medicines? What do you favor more? And in India, we use branded generics. There's a loophole. So, could you just explain the audience, because people here are freshers, students who are watching the podcast. So, it'll be very easy for them to understand in a very layman term.
So I think let's understand the very basics.
Okay.
So when a company invents a medicine, they get a patent for it, right? And that patent could last from 12 to 20 years, right? Now, when the patent gets over, other pharma companies can make that drug. So when other pharma companies can make that drug becomes generic. So if, say, Pfizer developed Gelusil, which is basically pantoprazole, then Pfizer has a patent to it. If any other company makes that same drug, pantoprazole, then that drug becomes a generic drug. right? So let's understand that's a generic drug. Now, a generic drug can be made by Sun Pharma also, can be made by Biocon also. So those would be branded generics because Biocon is a brand.
Right.
And instead of calling Gelosil, they're calling it Peptic something or Pepsul or whatever. And then there is a generic where local pharma companies in different cities, they are just making their own version and just calling it anything and selling it off in the market. So that's the difference between a generic drug and a patented drug.
What I wanted to ask is that branded generics is what we mostly use in India, but still we don't have any clinical trials happening for that.
No, that's not true. Clinical trials do happen for all generics. I mean, the DCGI has very set rules that it does not matter whether you're doing a generic drug or something. I mean, it could start directly from phase 3 or
Right.
sometimes directly from phase 4 if it's an approved molecule. But clinical trials are important. Pharmacovigilance is important. The testament to how they're carried out probably is suspect, and that's something that for people to explore. I mean, personally, if you ask me, I do favor the original company because they spend a lot of money in designing that drug, and they say original hota hai.
Huh.
So I mean, again, but it's a matter of privilege. I think I'm at a privilege today to afford those medicines, and because I'm in the research field, it sort of gives me that impetus to sort of take those. But again, I'm not against generics, but I mean, at my level, I would want to have like the original drugs that are available. But I'm not against generics. I think that people who require a very expensive medication for life, like people who take insulin or people who take drugs for arthritis or people who take drugs for depressions and anxiety, I mean, they should go ahead for generics because otherwise it becomes your half of your life becomes in just solving your medical problems.
Any chronic diseases for that matter, the person
Yeah.
who has to take it every day, of course, the affordable side is the best thing about
Absolutely.
generics. Right. Okay. Thank you for answering that. Now let's talk about the more technical side of the podcast. Let's move towards clinical trials because you're an expert sitting in front of me, and we find very less people who can talk about topics like these. When I meet HCPs and other pharmacists or people from manufacturing domain, they tell us everything about the machinery and how tablet manufacturing and different formulations of pharmacy are prepared. But I want to talk about the rare side, that's the corporate pharma or the pharma IT sector. Clinical trial is one part of it because clinical trial does happen in the hospitals and everywhere in different sites, but there's a big domain sitting in the offices who's doing 9 to 5 desk job and working on the clinical trial data management. So could you differentiate for our audience what is clinical trial and what is clinical trial data management? What are the two different things that are being carried out?
I think it's very important to understand the whole ecosystem before I explain what clinical trials or what clinical trial data management is. Let's say you're a scientist at a university who just invented a miracle drug for, say, diabetes, to cure diabetes. I mean, what do? I mean, do you just directly go and give it to the patient? No. You will probably have a preclinical study where you will, take the formula from which, or take the drug that you've, say, developed, and you'll try it in different animal models. It could be mice models, or it could be different kinds of animals, depending on what kind of drug it is. Now, once that is done, which is a preclinical study, you then move on to what humans know. You then move on to biospecimens, the biobanking that we do. So basically, if say I developed a drug for diabetes, I would need to see the safety profile in say diabetic blood. So I mean, we people like us as biobankers, what we would do is say take 100 diabetic patients, take their consent, take their blood, and then give it to that pharma company. That pharma company would then do some kind of experiment to see whether that drug has a safety profile in that blood or not. And then it would come to a phase 0 or 1, basically depending on who uses what, where people would see in maybe a cohort of a small healthy population, 10 healthy patients with microdoses of the drug, whether the blood inside the human body is being able to tolerate that drug or not, whether the safety and efficacy can be established there. And then it would go on to phase 2 and then 3 and then 4. And then the data which is being studied for all those 4 phases, whether it's a preclinical study, whether it's a biobanking study, whether it's phase 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all that data is what a clinical data management person is doing in their own ways. And then the level above that is pharmacovigilance, where they are seeing whether those data sets are safe or not. So basically, it comes down to brass tacks where you have your phases, then you have your data management, and then you have your pharmacovigilance, and then you have your medical reports, which finally goes to the government whether the drug is allowed in the market or not.
Right. Okay. Let's dig a little bit more deeper. Can you tell us what exactly happens in a clinical trial and what is GCP?
So I think I'll start with GCP because that's something that everyone needs to know. So the full form of GCP is good clinical practices. Now, please understand, clinical trials were not always regulated. There were illegal experiments on Jews, there were illegal experiments on African Negroes, there were illegal experiments everywhere and all throughout history, right? Now, during World War II, when these things became serious, and I don't know if your audience would know about it, but they'll probably study in pharmacy history, it's called the Nuremberg trials. And then there was a thalidomide incident where 40,000 pregnant women had to abort their children because that drug was not clinically tested. So basically, there was a place in Europe called Helsinki where 7 countries met up and they formed the good clinical practice, the international, that's why it's often called IHC GCP, which is International Conference of Helsinki Good Clinical Practices.
Right.
And that's where the good clinical practices were formed, where they came out with 2 very important things. The first was consent, that whenever you're doing a clinical trial, the patients have to be consented. They should know that they're getting into a clinical trial and should volunteer to do that trial. And the second biggest thing, which I think a lot of people miss out on, is randomization. Like if a drug is being given to a certain cohort of people, it needs to be randomized without any prejudice of race, religion, sex, gender, nothing. So these are the 2 things that came out, and good clinical practices became a way to conduct clinical trials. So that is why anyone who wants to be in the clinical trial fields need to understand that these are the good clinical practices. And I think the GCP part explains the clinical trial part. So basically, a clinical trial is when you want to test a drug or a device or a molecule or an observation, because there are psychiatric clinical trials as well, there are psychology clinical trials as well, on a group of patients. Now, when you are getting a group of patients, the first thing is that you need to consent. If I'm trying a diabetes drug on a diabetic patient, I need to tell them that this is a new drug, this is a new molecule. Are you okay to try this? This might help your problems, but this might also cause 10 other problems. If they feel that yes, this is something that they want to volunteer for, then they say yes, consent. That's number one. Second is randomization. More often than not, drugs are always compared to either placebo or they compare to the old drug.
Yeah,
Now,
the
if I tell you
competitor in the market.
exactly, so if I tell you that you might get the new drug or the old drug, it needs to be randomized. It cannot be biased. If you're a rich person, say for example, you're dying with a very high level of cancer, and we are testing a very rare drug with a placebo, right? I mean, if I tell you that this drug is the one we are offering, and the placebo I'll give it to another patient, would that be fair? A rich and a poor person should have an equal chance of getting that drug or not in case of death. So that is why randomization was the second thing which is important. So in a clinical trial, as a company, what we do is we are a site management organization where we have multiple sites across the country where we take contracts from different pharmaceutical companies or CROs, and we take basically their drugs. We get the approval from the DCGI, then we get approval from the local ethics committee, and once the approvals are done, we then get a doctor on board who helps us conduct the study. That doctor will first take consent of the patient, and then we will administer the drug to the patient, and we will take the before and after reports, whether it's a blood report or in case of a cancer it's a CT scan, and then we will compare and give that raw data to the pharmaceutical company to compare. That's what happens in a clinical trial in a gist.
Okay. And what would you tell us about how things work at a site? Like there's a principal investigator and there are so many clinicians. So, what is their work exactly? How do they interact personally with the patients? And also, since you mentioned about the RCTs, are RCTs really conducted that much stringently as you're mentioning,
No,
like on paper or in real?
I think as far as randomizations are concerned, I think that's followed very strictly
Okay.
because medicines can be accounted for and they can be, there's something called IMP accountability. That's investigational medical product accountability, and nowadays patients are even called sometimes, to check by auditors and monitors whether everything is being given to them or not. And plus, a lot of studies are pharmacokinetic, or which means that they'll tell you that we need to draw the patient's blood 16 times a day, and then they will be able to tell you whether that patient has that drug in their body or not. So in that sense, randomized clinical trials are happening in a correct manner, and I think that's something that is going to continue, because procedurally things are getting more tougher, compliance wise things are getting more tougher, auditing wise, monitoring wise, things are getting tougher.
Okay. Back to my question. Could you also throw some light over the interaction between patient and the investigators, principal investigator, clinicians that are present at the site, at the clinical trial monitoring site?
So if I come down to like very student level, and when students are doing a day job, I mean not a day job, a job in a, say if they are the clinical research coordinator for a specific clinical trial, I mean something that they need to understand is that when we sign up a project or a clinical trial study with a doctor, there's something called an investigator undertaking, which is appendix 8. Now that appendix 8 is a form, or which is a commitment from a doctor to the central government and to the pharma company, that I am undertaking this clinical trial. I'm fully aware of good clinical practices, and I'm fully aware that all the medical responsibility of the patient will be mine, and I'm fully aware that the money that I'm being given for this is a grant that is for the patient and for the hospital and for my services rendered, and this is not something that I'm doing as a business. So that thing is something that the clinical research coordinator gets signed by a doctor. So as far as patients and doctors are concerned, technically an entire clinical trial is being conducted by a doctor. We are an ecosystem which helps the doctor make sure that the clinical trial is done correctly. So if a clinical research coordinator's role is to make sure the paperwork is up to date, is to make sure that all the reports are filed, all the reports are signed, because let's face it, we as a country, we have a ratio 1 is to 10,000, like 10,000 patients to one doctor. So in that case scenario, the doctor has so many patients to serve that they need an ecosystem to help them, be in touch with the paperwork, be in touch with everything. So on a very ground side of things, the doctors and the nurses and the hospitals are very directly connected to the patients, and the research coordinators make sure that everything happens smoothly.
Right. Now let's move from clinical trials to the biobanking part. Can you explain in a very layman fashion what exactly is a biobank and how it works?
So biobank is exactly what it is called.
Okay.
Basically, you are banking biospecimens. I think if I called it biospecimens banking, it would be a very explanatory term. So biospecimens are any part of the human body. If I take out your blood, that is a biospecimen. If I take out the plasma from your blood, that's a biospecimen. If I take the serum out of your blood, that's biospecimen. If I take your hair, that's a biospecimen. If I take your nails, that's biospecimen. You'll be surprised people want sweat also. So sweat and tears also. So we have got requests where people have asked for tears of certain patients because they wanted to study the inside of the tear. And then the eyes, the brain tissue, heart tissue, liver tissue, cancer tissue, all of these things are called biospecimens, right? Now please understand why biospecimens will be required. The first thing is to understand disease trends. When COVID happened, everyone knows about COVID. The world went into chaos, right? But we kept hearing the words, this is SARS-CoV-1, this is SARS-CoV-2, this is a alpha variant, and this is a beta variant, and this is a Omicron variant. Where does that come from? It comes from biobanking. Do you think as a patient you are getting your blood tested and saying, "Mera variant bata dena"? You are saying COVID positive hai ki nahi?
Right.
Do you think it is possible to do the variants without genomic testing? That genomic testing, that variance testing comes from these academic bodies who take samples from biobanks. Right?
Right.
So you need to biobank disease data for you to understand. So that's disease trend. The second thing is basically if you are, say, making a diabetes sugar glucose meter, right, where you take a drop of your blood and then the value comes on the meter. So in that case, every medical device company needs to test that strip on, say, 100 diabetic patients to make sure that the device is working correctly. And the third thing is the pharma, like I said, in the clinical trials, the preclinical, where they use the specimens, the tissues, the hair to study the disease so that they can make a drug accordingly. That's what biobanking is in a nutshell.
Okay. So, clinical trial, how you started through the internship and everything, वो तो समझ आया. But how did you decide कि I want to become a biobanker or like Jeevanam Biobank, I
Mm.
think is the name
Yeah.
of your company or your product. So, how did you come up with that?
You'll be surprised I didn't even know I was biobanking.
Okay.
Because I mean, I was so unaware of that word that actually a friend of mine told me this word biobanking because I didn't even know I was biobanking because I thought of everything as clinical research only. See, technically, biobanking is clinical research.
Yes.
Visit one of clinical research is biobanking. I mean, if you have to really uh, brutally simplify it,
Right.
in visit one, when you call a patient, you basically take their blood, you take their specimens, you test whether the patient is healthy or not. You take out the medical history, you take their consent, right? It is just that biobanking stops there. Once your disease is confirmed, once you've taken out the specimens, the like the functionality ends there. But that's exactly what biobanking is. So we didn't know that we were doing this biobanking thing for certain companies in India, certain pharma companies in India like Zydus and Biocon, and we found out much later that it's called biobanking. And then we got approached by a US company, and then now 90% of all our clients in the US and Europe. Unfortunately, we would love to have more Indian clients for biobanking, but that also goes to show that we aren't doing as much as drug discovery in India as we are doing abroad, which is why I pointed out in our earlier questions that I think Indian entrepreneurs really need to step up in terms of drug discovery
Practice.
and in terms of genomic understanding.
Right. Okay. So, any speciality about your biobank, Jeevanam Biobank? You want to?
I think as a specialty, I mean, something that we really want to specialize is in cancer. I mean, and okay, so as a commercial company, it is also because the funding is great in cancer. So it helps you survive as a company. And I think practically we need to think about practicality also. But on the other spectrum of things, I think cancer is now becoming like diabetes.
Yeah, very
So
common.
cancer is growing at an alarming rate. At an alarming rate, people are being very okay with the unhealthy lifestyles they're leading. People are being okay with obesity. People are even celebrating obesity, and I think that is a very big area of concern because there's a difference between and I might sound wrong when I say it, but there's a difference between body shaming and there is a difference between someone being okay with being unhealthy. Because when a person or when a cohort of people are okay with being unhealthy, they are putting a burden on the healthcare system. Because 80% of all diseases are preventable. All cardiac, 90% of all cardiac problems are preventable. But because of the lifestyle choices that people are making, all right, the healthcare system comes into burden, and the people who are actually diseased don't get their need met. If someone has a genetic dystrophy, if someone has a genetic variation, they don't get treatment enough because the pharma company is concentrating on the statins that they need to make. Never in the history of the world, if you study regulatory US FDA policies and US policies, European policies, Indian policy, name one drug which has reduced the number of diabetics in the world. Name one drug which has reduced the cholesterol problem in the world. There are the fanciest drugs you have for diabetes, the fanciest drugs you have for cholesterol, the fanciest drugs you have for obesity, but why are they not eliminating the problem? The problem is growing at a 12% CAGR or 20% CAGR or 30% CAGR. Do you really feel that the financial director board and pharmaceutical companies are discussing, oh, let's make a drug to reduce the disease? They have presentations about how the disease is increasing and how the market will explode and how investors should invest.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
mindset is different. It's because everyone knows that preventative health is the best. Internally, everyone knows, every scientist knows, every doctor knows, but the people don't know. And that is one of the reasons why I started biohacking and researching into anti-aging, because no matter what research you do on drugs, no matter what you do in whichever field you have, there is no drug which is going to save you.
Okay, so I think this is where the of HEOR comes into play, where we are, finding out the outcomes research, or we are talking about the health
Real
economics
world
where,
evidence
yeah,
studies.
exactly, and we are forecasting, we are doing the future forecasting of where the medicine market is going to go, and how many other people in 2026 or by 2030 would be having diabetes and will be taking the medication chronically. So yeah, that's very much alarming, and I agree to whatever you said right now. And so biobanking would, you think it affect the way things are going on around the society?
I really feel that biobanking will help us save the next pandemic.
Okay.
Because if you can study disease regularly, if you know what's changing, the reason why COVID struck us so bad is because we don't study COVID enough. Like, in fact, even when COVID happened in India, probably only 1 or 2% were tested for this alpha, beta, omicron, or whatever. I mean, imagine 98% of the population who probably got COVID don't even know the kind of variations they had in their body. If you cannot understand something, you cannot solve it. I mean, I was very fortunate enough to be in a conference where Baman Irani was speaking, and something he said really struck me, and I really followed to the T, is that you have to define what you want. I think the same thing applies in medicine also. If you do not define the problem you want to solve, you cannot solve it. There's a line in The Matrix also. I don't know if you've seen that movie, in
Okay.
which Neo, the chosen one, he goes to the Oracle, and the Oracle offers him, a toffee, and he says that you already know whether I'm going to take it or not. Why ask? She said, because you already know the answer. You don't know the question.
Oh, that's very deep.
So, that's exactly what it is. You need to understand what your question is. If you don't understand the why, you will not be able to understand the how.
Yeah, right. Just like we start discovering a drug, we need to have a problem in hand first, and then we can, look for the possible treatments
And
that
no one is
that
really
can
doing
apply.
that.
Yes,
But
exactly.
biobanking can help you identify it. I mean, for me, biobanking is the value I'm trying to add. Because apart from every other thing, I tell my employees that you need to have a purpose bigger than my business. If you walk into my office and you think that you're doing this for money, and if you think that you're just doing this because to fill my pockets, then believe me, you will not thrive. You will only thrive, or the company will only thrive, if a majority of that company believes that my purpose is higher. Why does Apple thrive? Because Apple's why is challenging the status quo. And that's what most people believe. Why does Tesla thrive? Because Tesla thrives because they believe that we will put out rockets in space and we will build life on Mars. Their belief system is bigger than the company. So, if, and also for all the life sciences entrepreneurs out there, if they do not believe that their purpose of business is higher than money, including me, we will not thrive. And I genuinely believe, like, I have, I mean, if you ever see my office, I've read to become the world's largest biobank. India has 20% of the world's disease population. Karachi has registered biobanks. India, in a non-commercial organization, doesn't have a biobank as a commercial biobank. So my point is, we keep writing to become the world's largest biobank. You know why? To build purpose in my people. Because you have to build purpose. I genuinely believe that I'm adding value to the pharma ecosystem or the healthcare ecosystem by identifying patients and by giving that data in the form of tissue or blood or serum, because that is what's going to help you understand the genomic variations in people. Ultimately, that's going to help you develop the question.
Right.
You have too many people for the answers.
Yeah, we have a certain number of, I think the largest population in the world, especially of the diseased as well.
we have
People
we have
having,
18% of the world's disease burden.
right.
And just for the listeners, it means that if 100 people are sick in the world, 18 people are from India.
Oh my God. That's alarming again.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask you, with the advancing technologies, how is it going to affect biobanking? And does AI gonna affect it at all? Like, is it gonna
um
help out or
I
something?
think, as far as life sciences is concerned, and I'm strictly speaking about biobanking and clinical research, I think AI is the best thing that can happen. Because healthcare is something where AI can only add value and information. AI cannot extract blood from your veins. AI cannot mix chemicals together. I mean, of course, the factories can if they are enabled, but AI is something that can only help pharma, that can only help biotech. I feel that as far as the life sciences industry is concerned, and I know that there are two different groups of people, some who are for and some who are against. But my personal opinion is that AI should be embraced as far as clinical trials and biobanking are concerned, because if you can make two data speak to each other, no human being can do that.
Okay, so I've read some places in some of the articles, people say nowadays that someday AI can actually hack over the clinical trials, and there can be someday in the future where we can actually replace human trials with some or the other AI softwares. Is it possible somewhere down the line?
That's a very interesting theory, because in a utopian world that can happen. And like, let me explain how. Um, like, if we just break down to brass tacks, like a clinical trial is where you are testing for the efficacy of the drug or the efficiency of a drug, dosage kitna hona chahiye, like how much dose to give a patient, the safety profile. These are the largely main three things that you test in a clinical trial. Now, you know how we are doing biobanking, where we are trying to identify the problem in the patient and we are justifying ki ye identification hai and all that. Now, imagine a utopian world where 140 crore people or 150 crore people get their blood tested every month, or 2 months, or 3 months. And all their information, their calcium, B12, D3, hemoglobin, their body scan, every medical information that you would need from a patient is uploaded, right? So, again, in a utopian world far, far away in the future, if, say, someone is making a drug, and after making that drug, if someone is just taking the data of all the patients that are diseased, say I want to test on 100 lung cancer patients, मेरे को सबका blood samples का data मेरे computer screen में है 100 blood patients का, and मेरे पास मेरा drug का profile है कि वो कैसा है, and then I'll just see how they interact with each other in an AI modulation. And I think, again, in a utopian world, that's possible. But again, that would not replace human beings, because you'd still need someone to collect blood or draw blood. Even, I mean, yes, technically you can have machines doing that, but you would still need an infrastructure to be able to, and humans to exist for those trials to happen.
Right, exactly. So, like we have smart bandages coming up, we have digital pills coming up. So maybe someday we could actually do what you're just telling
And you'd
about.
be surprised how fast that could happen, because AI will be exponential, not linear.
Right. Okay. Great. So, moving ahead towards the end of the podcast, what I want to ask you is, like, if somebody who's listening the podcast wants to join Indoriv Clinical and is a fresher or an experienced person, around 2, 3, 4, 5 years experience, and he or she wants to join the company, what are your expectations from your employees, the people you hire, and what are the things you offer?
I think as a fresher, we don't expect anything.
Okay.
I mean, usually when we have a specific role, when we are hiring freshers, honestly, like, just to be very candid with you, what can you expect from a fresher? Because they're just fresh from an academic background. Because studying in a college and working in a real life situation are two very different things. So I don't think anyone in their right minds expects anything from the freshers in terms of working. I think what we do expect is communication skills. What we do expect is smartness. What we do expect is their ability to work in a team orientation. So, like, there's this very big theory on motivation, which says that it's not about you, right? So it's like, if A works A times hard, it's A square. But if A plus B whole square is A square plus B square plus 2AB, but if A comes minus B, right, then it's A square plus B square minus 2AB. So if you just equate all of them together, I mean, if a person has the capability to work in a team, he will be adding 2AB to my company. So what we see a lot of times is that when we are interviewing people, we see their ability to gel in with other people. So, I call these soft skills. A person needs to have a really good capability of gelling with other people, because it's never about you. In a life sciences company, it's not like, someone as a mad scientist can exist, because you can be the highest functioning narcissist in the world, but you will be pathetic in a corporate environment. I would rather have high trust, low performance in my company than low trust, high performance any
Okay.
day.
That's very specific. So people looking for applying, just go through this details. It's the owner talking to you directly. Lastly, I would want to ask, like, you are a pioneer in clinical trials. You're an expert biobanker. So if somebody wants to start their own company as an entrepreneur somewhere in CROs or something like that, what is your advice to the young life sciences entrepreneurs?
I think, just again, like I said before, just go for it, because I'll be very honest with you. And I think I understood this very early in my career, is that in healthcare, monopoly cannot exist. They just cannot exist. Everyone works with each other. In fact, I mean, I would encourage your audiences, if they are interested in biobanking, if they're living in tier 2, tier 3 cities, I would love to tie up with them if they want to be entrepreneurial, because we're always looking for more entrepreneurs to network with, to give them work to, because work is never a problem in this industry. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Work is not a problem, execution is the problem. You can get work from 100 countries around the world. It is so easy to get work in this field. It is about how you can execute it. In fact, if there are people out there who want to be entrepreneurs, who would want to get into biobanking, who would want to get into clinical research, I honestly welcome them if they can contact my team. And if they're in tier 2, tier 3 cities, especially, and if they can execute orders, we're more than happy to give it.
Okay. Any last message you want to give to the audience? Anybody watching the podcast? Something from Anant.
I think don't hesitate, because I think we think too much, because ideas will never be fully formed, whether it's a job or whether it's an entrepreneurial program. Uh, just keep working at it. Like, I really believe that there are only two kinds of decisions, the right decisions and the wrong decisions that you make right after you realize they're wrong. So, people who hesitate too much, take too much time, uh, I don't think they end up doing anything. So just don't hesitate.
Okay. That was again deep. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast. It was wonderful speaking to you. It's a very heavy podcast, very difficult for me to digest. I will have to sit not only in the editing, but will be watching it on my TV again and again to, go through. And I might be making notes as a student, even after sitting in front of you for an hour like this. So thank you so much for coming over this podcast and sharing all the different details and things and educational academic things that you have shared. I think everything you spoke came from your heart, because you've been super candid. I was thinking this would be more like a very technical podcast, but you have been really honest. So thank you for being like that.
Mitali, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being so kind.